The nation did not wake to a rumour. It woke to a royal earthquake. Behind palace doors, King Charles had done what no one believed he would dare to do. He finalised a new role for Princess Anne, placing her beside the crown as Queen Consort in authority, ceremony, and national duty. And the moment his pen touched the page, the monarchy changed forever. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles sat alone after the signing, his hand near the pen, as if one more movement might make the decision final. He had approved a royal instrument, a formal palace document used to define duties, ranks, and responsibilities. And this one carried a sentence no courtier would forget. Anne would stand beside the crown as Queen Consort in ceremonial standing, representation and advisory authority. The king understood the meaning with painful clarity. This was no adjustment. This was a controlled transfer of trust. It placed his sister at the centre of duty while reducing Camilla's influence. Anne received the message without celebration. She read the words once, then again, and the silence became heavier than applause. The Princess Royal had spent a lifetime avoiding drama, spectacle, and the hunger for attention that destroyed figures inside palace walls. Yet now the burden had come to her, not as a reward, but as a demand. She knew the country would see elevation. She felt something colder. Responsibility, pressure. Duty does not crown a person with joy, but fastens them to history. Charles felt pressure closing around him. He knew some would call the decision a betrayal, especially those who believed old expectations should survive any damage. But the monarch believed the alternative was worse. Hesitation, confusion, and a crown losing balance before the nation. A sealed briefing note revealed the truth behind the shock. The plan had not been written overnight. It had been prepared for weeks, revised in private, and held back until the king could no longer pretend delay was wisdom. Palace staff sensed danger before the announcement left the room. One aide lowered his voice when he realised Camilla had not yet been personally told. Another understood the risk. Anne's rise would be seen not only as trust in one woman, but as doubt cast over another. Beyond that door, the Queen Consort was about to learn that the most important decision about her future had already been completed without her. But before the palace could understand what Charles had done, the people closest to the crown had to face what this decision would cost them personally. Every royal crisis has a public headline, but the true damage begins in private faces. Charles had signed the decision. Anne had inherited the burden. Camilla had been pushed toward humiliation, and William had been forced to decide whether this was wisdom or surrender. Inside the palace, the announcement was no longer about titles. It was about loyalty, pride, grief, and survival. Charles left the signing room slowly, carrying the silence like a punishment. He paused outside the door, not because he doubted the paper, but because he knew the paper would divide the people closest to him. The decision mattered, because Anne's new role was more than a ceremonial honour. A ceremonial role means a public duty performed in the name of the crown. And this one gave her the power to represent continuity, discipline, and national trust beside the sovereign. The king had not simply elevated his sister. He had admitted the monarchy needed a steadier hand near its centre. Camilla sat alone with the announcement copy resting in her lap. She read the words without blinking, then pressed her fingers against the page, as if the sentence itself had wounded her. The Queen Consort understood what others would whisper before sunset. Anne had been placed where she once expected to stand, unchallenged. She felt replaced, not corrected. She felt exposed, not protected. And that pain made the decision sharper, because royal dignity survives on appearance, and appearance had just turned against her. William studied the same announcement with a colder kind of fear. The prince respected Anne's discipline, and he knew the public trusted the Princess Royal because she never chased applause. But he also knew one crisis could give birth to another. If the palace solved uncertainty by humiliating Camilla, then the future king would inherit not peace but resentment disguised as order. That was why his silence mattered. He was not resisting Anne, he was measuring the cost. Anne did not celebrate. She asked Charles one question in a private recorded conversation kept for the family archive. Had he chosen her because he trusted her, or because he no longer trusted anyone else? The king did not answer quickly. Nearby, a senior aide warned that royal precedents, the order showing who stands, enters, and appears first at major ceremonies, would have to be rewritten overnight. One role had changed, but the entire palace structure trembled. And buried beneath the official announcement was one private incident that had turned hesitation into action. The decision did not begin with a document. It began with a moment everyone tried to forget. Weeks earlier, during a closed Windsor ceremonial rehearsal, Princess Anne watched a private disagreement spiral into something far more dangerous. Confusion over authority, clashing instructions, and a stunned room waiting for Charles to intervene. That night became the trigger no one could undo. Anne remembered the Windsor rehearsal breakdown with a sharpness that would not leave her. A ceremonial rehearsal means a private practice for public royal duties, where every movement, entrance, and place is tested before the nation ever sees it. That evening mattered because Camilla's preferred position clashed with the Princess Royal's instruction, and the courtiers froze between two commands. The Queen Consort wanted one order followed, and Anne demanded another. Suddenly, the room was no longer practicing ceremony, it was exposing weakness. Charles watched the hesitation spread like a crack through glass. He saw one aide look toward Camilla, then toward Anne, then back toward the king, waiting for rescue. The monarch felt shame burn deeper than anger, because the crown is supposed to give direction, not confusion. Anne did not raise her voice. She simply said the duty would proceed according to service, not preference. That sentence restored order, but it also revealed the truth Charles feared most. His sister had studied the room before he did. Camilla felt the correction like a public wound, even inside a private setting. She did not forget Anne's tone, and Anne did not forget the silence that followed. The Princess Royal's anger was never about personal victory. It came from watching the institution become vulnerable, because private pride had entered public duty. That mattered because one confused rehearsal could become one confused national ceremony, and one confused ceremony could make the monarchy look divided before millions. Charles requested a constitutional-style briefing after the rehearsal, according to a documented account prepared for the family archive. A constitutional-style briefing means a written explanation of what powers, roles, and limits can exist around the crown without breaking the structure of the monarchy. In the margin of that file, the king left a handwritten note. The crown cannot afford confusion beside it. Those words became the quiet beginning of Anne's new role, and Camilla would soon force the pain of that beginning into the open. What began as a silent correction in Windsor became a confrontation no palace wall could soften. There are moments when a palace does not need raised voices to feel like it is breaking. Camilla entered the private room expecting an explanation, but Charles had already made his choice. Across a polished table, with no crowd and no ceremony to hide behind, she asked whether Anne had been given what once belonged to her. The answer changed everything. Camilla held the announcement copy as if it had betrayed her personally. She had received it in her apartments before hearing the truth from the king, and that alone made the wound deeper. A royal apartment means a private living space inside palace life, but privacy did not protect her from humiliation. The Queen Consort understood at once why the decision mattered. Anne's new role would change seating, ceremony, representation, and access to the quiet influence that surrounds royal duty. She was not just reading about another woman's rise, she was reading the shape of her own reduced power. Charles kept his voice low, but calm did not make him gentle. He told Camilla the monarchy needed steadiness more than sentiment, and the words landed harder because the king believed them. She heard correction. He meant survival. She saw a personal demotion. He saw a national emergency. That difference made the room feel colder because neither of them was arguing over a misunderstanding. They were arguing over the truth. Camilla asked whether William had supported it. The question struck Charles in the one place he could not protect. He did not answer quickly, and that pause told her more than any speech. The prince's silence had weight because he represented the future, and if the future king had not resisted Anne's rise, then the Queen Consort knew the palace had already moved beyond her objection. Charles finally admitted, through a recorded private conversation kept in the family archive, that William had asked only one thing, whether the decision would stabilise the crown or simply punish her. Camilla did not forgive the answer. She leaned forward and asked if Anne had wanted this. Charles shook his head and revealed the condition his sister had placed in writing: no personal ambition, no private reward, and no use of the role to humiliate anyone. That written limit mattered because it proved the Princess Royal had accepted duty, not victory. But for Camilla, even mercy felt like defeat. She rose slowly, wounded by the decision and by the care taken to make it look fair. Camilla left the room shaken, but the greater power behind the decision was still waiting to be exposed. Because Charles may have signed the paper, but the force that made it possible reached far beyond one man's fear. A crown is never moved by emotion alone. Behind Charles's signature stood advisors, family pressure, constitutional caution, and one undeniable truth. The public trusted Anne in a way the palace could no longer ignore. In a locked briefing room, William studied the revised order while a senior courtier watched his face change, realising the future king understood exactly what had been done. William did not speak at first. He kept reading line by line because every sentence carried consequences for the monarchy he would one day inherit. The revised order mattered because Anne's reputation for discipline gave the palace something it badly needed, a figure the public saw as firm, loyal, and untouched by personal drama. A crown companion position means a special role beside the sovereign, built around service, public representation, and emergency continuity when trust must be protected. Anne was being placed there because the institution needed steadiness it could show. The prince felt the pressure of that truth. He wanted the crown protected, but he did not want protection to look like punishment. Camilla had already been wounded by the decision, and William knew humiliation could become its own scandal if the palace handled it without care. That was why his silence became important. He was not blocking Anne. He was weighing whether one repair would leave another crack behind. Anne carried her own fear into the same decision. She worried people would mistake sacrifice for ambition, and that misunderstanding cut deeply because the Princess Royal had spent her life refusing the spotlight others chased. A documented briefing note from a senior courtier explained why the decision finally passed. Anne had demanded no personal household expansion, no private reward, and no extra privilege beyond duty. That mattered because it proved she had accepted the burden to protect the crown, not to build a court around herself. Charles had accepted those limits because they made the role harder to attack. The king knew the palace could defend sacrifice more easily than power. Then the briefing revealed the clause that changed everything. Anne could stand beside him at major national ceremonies when public trust in the crown was at risk. A national ceremony means a public royal event tied to the country's identity, where every place and gesture carries meaning. William understood it immediately. This was not decoration. This was authority made visible. And once that clause became active, the palace would have to show the new order in real time. The ink had barely dried before the first consequence landed at Camilla's door. The first sign of change was not a speech, it was a door that no longer opened. Camilla arrived for a scheduled ceremonial planning session and found the seating chart already revised, the briefing folder already reassigned, and Anne's name placed where hers had always been expected. In that quiet moment, humiliation became real, and the palace understood the old order was gone. Camilla stood still as an aide removed the folder meant for her. She did not need anyone to explain the message. A ceremonial planning session means the private meeting where palace staff arrange who enters, stands, speaks, and represents the crown at major public events. That meeting mattered because it controlled what the nation would soon see. Anne would now lead the next briefing beside Charles, and the Queen Consort would no longer shape the room from the centre. Anne learned of the revised plan without pleasure. The Princess Royal understood that protocol language, the official wording used to describe royal positions and duties, was already being changed to reflect her new consort-level function. Procession order, appearance schedules, and briefing access were all being adjusted around her. That mattered because palace power does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it appears in a name moved higher on a page, a chair placed closer to the king, or a folder handed to someone else. Camilla felt the sting of being present, but no longer central. Aides avoided her eyes, and their silence made the wound worse. She had survived criticism before, but this felt different because it came from inside the institution she had fought to belong to. The Queen Consort watched Anne's name settle into the place she once believed was secure, and for the first time, the change no longer felt theoretical. It had entered the room before her. Anne privately told an aide, in a documented palace account, that humiliation must never become the purpose of duty. She would accept responsibility, but she would not turn another woman's pain into victory. William quietly approved the revised order only after asking whether Charles had reviewed every line himself. The prince knew this was the first public test of the decision, and the king's personal approval meant there could be no later denial, no retreat, and no claim of misunderstanding. Charles had reviewed it all. A revised seating plan placed Anne beside him at the next national service, confirming the shift would be visible to the country. The king had chosen steadiness, but steadiness had already begun hurting people. For all the ceremony surrounding the decision, the deepest truth emerged only when brother and sister were left alone. The most powerful conversation happened away from every witness. Charles and Anne stood in a private room where titles meant less than blood, memory, and duty. He had given her the role, but she had not yet given him peace. Before accepting the burden fully, Anne made one condition clear. She would serve the crown, but she would not become another weapon inside the family. Charles entered without aids, folders, or prepared words. He looked older in that silence, not because the crown had weakened him, but because family pain had finally reached the throne. A private royal meeting means a closed conversation between family members, where no officials guide the language or soften the truth. This one mattered because the king could no longer hide behind documents, and Anne could no longer pretend the role was only about service. Brother and sister had to decide whether this change would heal the monarchy or deepen the wound. Anne did not comfort him quickly. The Princess Royal listened as he admitted, in a recorded conversation preserved for the family archive, that he feared the crown had become unstable under the weight of personal division. Charles said the institution needed someone beside him who would not bend duty around emotion. The admission broke something open. The king had not chosen his sister to punish Camilla. He had chosen her because confusion had become dangerous. Anne answered with quiet force. She told him, "Duty without restraint becomes cruelty, and cruelty would poison everything we are trying to save." That mattered because the queen consort was already wounded, and Anne understood that public trust could not be rebuilt through private humiliation. The Princess Royal would not allow her new authority to become revenge. Dressed in ceremony, she had accepted pressure, not permission to wound. Charles listened as Anne named her condition. She demanded written assurance that Camilla would keep her dignity, residence, and personal respect, even if her ceremonial influence changed. A written assurance means a formal promise recorded inside palace papers, so no one can later deny what was agreed. The king accepted it because he finally understood the difference between discipline and punishment. Anne's power would be defined by limits, not appetite. Anne left him with one final truth. The crown survives only when service is stronger than pride. Charles agreed, and in that agreement, the decision changed shape. It was no longer only a shocking transfer of power. It became an act of restraint. That private mercy would shape how the public received the story. When the news exploded across Britain, when the palace doors opened to the outside world, Britain did not just hear an announcement. It watched a monarchy redefine itself. By morning, the story belonged to the nation. The palace statement was read on breakfast broadcasts, debated outside royal gates, and printed in bold black letters across front pages. Yet one image captured the entire country's mood. A crowd gathering outside Buckingham Palace as someone held up a newspaper reading, "Anne beside the crown." Shock turned into judgment. Britain stared at that headline and understood the scale of what had happened. The front page showed Charles and Anne beneath the palace crest, and the message felt impossible to ignore. A palace statement means an official written message released by the royal household to explain a decision to the public. This one mattered because it did not simply announce a new duty. It confirmed that the crown was changing the way trust, service, and authority would appear before the nation. Broadcasters repeated the words with stunned restraint. One breakfast host called it the most dramatic reshaping of royal ceremonial authority in modern memory. Ceremonial authority means the power to stand, represent, and act publicly on behalf of the crown during important national moments. That mattered because royal power is often seen through symbols, and Anne had now become the symbol of steadiness beside the king. Charles had made the decision inside palace walls, but Britain was now deciding what